One of the bright points in the Nixon's administration anti-crime program is the city of Washington, D.C. The heroin addiction there is higher than most people had dreamed, a true epidemic.
They are impressionable. Their value system, their sense of right and wrong is developing, and these drug-infested streets are their learning ground. From his window, this boy watches a world that could be described as not suitable for children's viewing. Police and a rescue squad try to revive an overdose victim. Other children gather round, but in their eyes there is neither shock nor sadness.
Customs agents made an important drug bust this afternoon at Dulles Airport near Washington. They searched a passenger for illegal foodstuffs and found instead 1.5 pounds of heroin with a street value of $1 million.
Sylvester Kelly. He was in that book drinking. Carl was loud, flamboyant. That was his style. He was a showstopper. You know, that was his thing. Don't tell him how many he killed. He had 2 murder beats there that he got convicted for. Yeah, Terrible Turk. That was one of his nicknames.
They put a contract on the heads of Carl Kelly and the infamous Raymond Cadillac Smith. They robbed the after-hour spot in Southwest, and this was well before Carl got his hands on some of that good dope from IJ. Isaac James Tyndall, the man who they alleged was the head of a heroin operation in the district. Isaac Tyndall, aka IJ, was born in 1942 in South Carolina, but he was raised in the southwest part of the district. It was said that early on in life he showed signs of having a brilliant mind, ahead of his time, a master with numbers, and according to the DMC, DignityMemorial.com, they said by 1980, IJ started demonstrating a knack for business by investing in storefront properties, apartment buildings, video gaming, and satellite TV. IJ will become Carl Kelly's man and go-to for that pure dope when he went down that road. And so IJ served 4 years in prison in the early 70s, and his attorney, Kenneth Robertson, later confirmed that he was once a drug trafficker, but was reformed after spending time locked away. He also alleged that IJ returned back to the community with $100,000 from his past drug running days, and that he used the funds to invest in the real estate and other businesses. And from that point on, he went on to grind harder year by year from 1976 to 1983 when he was hit with the Kingpin case. The appeal documents listed a single purchase of product that IJ made at just under $500,000, $436,000 to be exact, when IJ was on top. That's a handsome ransom. One of the key differences I noticed between the crack era and the heroin era, right before crack hit, were the ages of the big dogs. Some of the major players were in their 40s and 50s, well-seasoned, sophisticated, utilizing legitimate businesses to rinse their money. They had accountants on deck, and I'm not just talking out the side, all this is documented. The same high-priced lawyers defended some of the same heavyweights, and those same heavyweights crossed paths at some of the same known hangouts, all up and down 14th Street and various sections of the city. Up in Harlem, Frank Lucas' heroin was called Blue Magic. In D.C., some of the quality stuff was nicknamed Golden Boy and Knockout. It was a real epidemic.
One of the bright points in the Nixon's administration anti-crime program is the city of Washington, D.C., where the crime rates have been going down. The city has one of the country's largest methadone programs, which involves a drug substitute therapy to reduce heroin addiction. But today, Washington got some chilling news. The rate of heroin addiction there is higher than most people had dreamed, a true epidemic.
In the slums of Washington, D.C., the problem of heroin addiction is apparently worse than anyone ever imagined. At least 17,000 addicts. It is most severe among young people. In males, 15 to 19 years old, 13%. 22 to 24 years old, 19%. In an area hard hit by the 1968 riots, almost a fourth of older teenage boys are addicts. Among young male adults, addicts now number 36%. Today, the director of narcotics treatment in the district said it was the most common serious disease among young people in Washington.
What other diseases are there in young people? You talk about traffic accidents, you talk about tuberculosis, you talk about cancer. I mean, there's no comparison between this. And you have to get into, the only other disease that would be similar in terms of the percentage would be gonorrhea, for example. But I think and that is serious too. I don't mean to say it isn't, but I think it's of a different order of seriousness.
So for those that don't know, heroin derived from morphine. Morphine comes from opium. And still, to this day, people debate whether or not if the Egyptians or Asians first widely cultivated opium in a poppy seed. Even if you look on Wikipedia, it's listed as uncertain, with Asia, Spain, and Africa as possible geographic origins. In the early 1900s, Americans began to use and become addicted to heroin. And we all know when it comes to drugs and alcohol, one man's pleasure is another man's profit. With a drug that powerful, creating a euphoric feeling effect in the mind and body, it was just a matter of time before it became problematic. The withdrawals associated with heroin use can be deadly in itself, to the point where addicts need and depend on the drugs just to keep from getting sick and going through cold sweats, vomiting, and restlessness. The 70s heroin epidemic in the district affected many young people who would indulge for recreation.
I would stick up, I would steal out of shopping centers, take parts off automobiles, I snatched pocketbooks, I broke into stores, I took from the other dudes in the neighborhood, I dealt dope, I sold dope, and if anyone, one of the dope dealers, one of the other dealers, if he owed him some money or something, he would ask me would I take care of him for him. I'd go get one of my other friends and we'd take care and get the money and split it up. Really, I guess I'd done everything a flat-foot hustler could do.
Gregory Lucas is one of 2,800 patients in Washington's narcotics treatment program. Using the drug methadone, doctors claim they're making headway. They say the program has helped reduce the city's crime rate. But the treatment is costly, $2,000 a patient, and they need more money.
Carl Sylvester Kelly, a.k.a. Terrible Turk, was the type of man that loved attention in his prime days. He loved going out dressing fly, shiny cars, pretty women, having a good time. But just as quick as he was to crack a smile, he had no problem with putting the murder game down. His family had a house right off 1st and Florida Avenue Northwest. And Carl took to the streets early, starting out with petty crimes. Eventually, he ended up at the Maple Glen Juvenile Facility in Laurel, Maryland, back in the 50s. He and Naeball had first met in 1959 at Maple Glen and became tight. Being in and out of correctional facilities would become routine for Carl. He would run the streets hustling and robbing, on the grind trying to make that fast, easy cash and get locked up, come home for some time and then get busted and end up right back in prison for a while. But while he was on his run, Carl made a name for himself. He knew how to hustle, and he made alliances with many men who were somebody on the streets back in the day. Top dogs of different trades, men like Cadillac, who he became good friends with, and co-defendants later on. Some of his hangout spots were up on 7th and Florida Avenue, 9th Street Northwest, and 14th Street Northwest. Very, very notable strips in the city. The men on the streets who later got caught up in the big heroin cases in the early 80s started out robbing and extorting just like Carl, almost as if it was a mandatory introduction into the game. Carl and Cadillac went to an after-hour spot off South Capitol Street Southwest where there was gambling going on. After losing all of their money, they both agreed to stick everybody up, robbing the joint for money, which they did without hesitation. So the man who ran the spot, who went by Dutch, put a contract on him. And because of that, Carl Kelly and Cadillac Smith had to lay low, so they left the city and headed for Big Stone Gap in Virginia. And this is where Carl would go down for his first murder on record. While they was in Virginia, Carl and Cadillac got into it with a man over a woman at a party. And so the altercation turned into the man losing his life. And Carl, Cadillac, and another named Wayne Fox would get captured and locked away. This is a photo showing Carl Kelly seated all the way to the left, serving time for the Big Stone Gap murder, along with Wayne Fox in the middle. Carl served 10 years on that murder beef. He did most of his time in the Lewisburg Penitentiary, but after 10 years, he made it back to the streets, back to D.C., and this is when Carl really started to shine. By the late 70s, Carl Kelly was moving heroin on the streets because of his business associate, IJ, who was the man with the connect and quality product. Carl Kelly, IJ, Vernon Cooper were experiencing a level of success in the heroin trade that an up-and-coming low-level dealer could only dream of. And when it comes to stunting, shining, or being flashy, some of these guys like Carl and IJ were the best to ever do it at that point. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. But when I look at this photo, I say this picture is worth 1,000 birds. To the right, we got IJ, allegedly one of the biggest heroin ringleaders at that time in Washington, D.C. The big man in the back with the hat on is, of course, Vernon Cooper, with street ties that go far back, even with him spending time on Alcatraz many years ago before finally making it off of that rock and later building a street empire. And of course, Carl Kelly, aka Terrible Turk, living in the moment, jack of all trades. At that time, making more money on the streets than ever before. This is their high moment. These times in Vegas, when they got a chance to break away from the game, break away from that vicious city to live like stars with the ladies who also got a chance to benefit from the work these guys put in on the streets. Even some of the ladies rocking jewelry and furs. Yes, sir. 1,000 birds. But like I always say, man, the street life is very unpredictable. One moment you up, smiling, having a good time, making easy money, and the next, you hit with the pressure.
But they really fucked up with Dog, because he took Bigfoot bad. Bigfoot was their man. Oh, he was their man. He was with the motherfucking DEA and he was their man. Big old motherfucking detective. Punishing motherfuckers. DC detective. You know? DC detective. AKA Bigfoot. Yeah. Because he was infamous. He was punishing motherfuckers, man. So he stepped up on Dog. Dog stressed him up.
Dog McKinney was a big man, real good with his hands that instilled fear in many men on the streets. He embarrassed the DC police by beating up a detective known on the streets at the time as Bigfoot. This detective was also known as someone that would fight suspects. Being as though he was a big man, he was able to manhandle quite a few suspects in the district. But that detective Bigfoot was no match for Dog McKinney. So Dog and Carl were once really close. Allegedly, Carl murdered Dog because he was stealing dope from him. The walls were closing in on Carl Kelly, but he just didn't know it. He got away with the murder of Dog. Well, at least as far as the law go, he never paid a price. But a little later on, an altercation at a club would once again test Carl's patience. It happened at the Harrington's nightclub on 9th Street Northwest, when a man who was jealous of Carl's flashy ways started trash talking him. The situation made his way outside the club, and at that point, without warning, Carl whipped out a pistol and left him right where he found him. The problem was, there were a ton of witnesses watching.
At the Harringtons. That's a club used to be up on 9th Street where the hustlers used to be at. He was in that motherfucker drinking. Carl was loud, flamboyant. That was his style. Loud, flamboyant, talk shit, diamonds on every finger, you know, clean as a motherfucker, you know, nice car. You know, he was a show, you know, he was a showstopper. You know, that was his thing. Motherfucker was up there hating on him. While he's in there doing his thing, minding his business, dude started talking shit. Disrespectful. Then he took dude right out. Then him and dude got outside. He gunned dude down right in front of, outside, in front of about like 8 or 9 different witnesses. One of them motherfuckers told on him.
Carl was arrested, tried, and convicted of murder and sentenced to 26 years to life at the Lawton Reformatory.
Last month, when it was discovered that the Washington Post story about an 8-year-old heroin addict was made up, the furor over the falsehood obscured the underlying truth of the newspaper's investigation. Drug addiction among youngsters in Washington as elsewhere is on the increase. That isn't made up, as Ray Nunn, who conducted our own investigation, now reports.
They are impressionable. Their value system, their sense of right and wrong is developing, and these drug-infested streets are their learning ground. From his window, this boy watches a world that could be described as not suitable for children's viewing. Police and a rescue squad try to revive an overdose victim. Other children gather round, but in their eyes there is neither shock nor sadness. They've seen this many times before. This is the norm, and they try to cope.
I live around this neighborhood, and we're not about to move. I'm just gonna have to deal with it.
Donnie's 11 years old, and already he and his classmates are well into the beginner's course in drug use.
I took a puff of reefer now and then. My class, about all of them smoke reefer, just about.
How many people in your class?
About 30, 27.
And because they know the streets, they don't have a supply problem.
It's around you. Ain't no way, anywhere that I walk, I might not be. Wherever I see a crowd of people at, that's where the drugs be at.
From this corner in Washington, you can get a good view of the Capitol Dome, or you can turn around and see this, Chapin Street, a drive-up, one-stop drug market. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the drug peddlers are here. But this is also a family street. Daughters play, mothers watch, and streetwise teenagers smoke a little reefer while trying to make a few sells. Most of their customers want marijuana, some heroin, others cocaine. But as we discovered, whatever the demand, the peddlers have the supply.
Columbia. Just Columbia? Where can I get some coke? How much?
Many of these peddlers are pre-teens, and they're motivated by two basic factors. One's a desire to make money, and the other is an ever-increasing pattern of drug addiction.
They sell drugs to get money to buy drugs.
How many people do you know your age who sell drugs?
In my class, just about half of them.
One teacher says that estimate is high, but she admits that some 5th and 6th graders are drug traffickers.
I try not to sell them myself. That's all I do. I just try to tend to my business and let theirs alone.
The child's on his own in the street and learns what he can and goes the best way he can. And the mother and father, if they're together, are out doing what they can to survive. We've created these conditions ourselves. The loss of a young person, whether they be 8 or 13, is still a loss of our future.
There are other streets like Chapin and other kids like Donnie throughout the country. And while the drug traffic is heaviest here, it's more than a ghetto problem. Some drug counselors say it's a national epidemic, drugs and kids. And as one former addict says, drugs have no respect for race, creed, color, or age. Ray Nunn, ABC News, Washington.
The walls closed in on IJ, Vernon Cooper, and like 12 other people as law enforcement used the new Kingpin Laws to try to take down these so-called, for lack of a better term, D.C. heroin giants. Carl Kelly's name was included in the indictment also, and the paper read, 14 in D.C. accused of running a multi-million-dollar heroin ring. And another section of the paper said, one defendant, Carl Sylvester Kelly, 38, who is serving a sentence at Lawton for murder, is alleged to have written a letter to the ring from Lawton for the purpose of ordering heroin. The crazy part about that highly publicized case was how they isolated IJ and prosecuted him alone. While some of the guys pleaded out, they claimed IJ bought a $160,000 Rolls Royce and even dropping $90K on the down payment for that. They also seized financial records showing that IJ spent more than $1.2 million in identifiable funds made from drug transactions. His run from 1978 to 1983 came crumbling down. With an all-white jury, how do you think the verdict was read? Exactly. They found him guilty and sentenced IJ to 50 years and said he will be eligible for parole in 14. The courts got an earful from IJ after that. He shouted out, "You have no right to play God. You don't even look like God." IJ will go on to serve 19 years in prison. He was released in the year 2000. Carl Kelly, on the other hand, will go on to do 20 plus years in prison, and because of a loss of records, he was released in the early 2000s. Carl went back to the streets, back to his old stomping grounds, and Carl eventually got a sort of theatrical ending that may be considered a traditional street life exit, ending with a bullet to the head and his body being left on the beltway. Message received.
So it wasn't like it used to be. So he was still thinking it was like it used to be. That was in the early 80s. It wasn't like that. Shit was, it ceased to be. That shit ceased to be really in the late 60s, early 70s. After that, motherfuckers started telling the spots. You know? So, you know, especially when the heroin got, you know, deep into the communities, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he killed the motherfucker and they gave him a life sentence. He came down and done 21 years, and what's your name gave the town back for him. Kenneth Bundy. He had Kenneth Bundy on his case, and they couldn't. And the reason why he came back out, they couldn't find his records. They ain't got no records on me. I went down and searched my records, and they were gone. They couldn't find his records, so he had made a pill case, you know, and they couldn't find the records, so they couldn't find the records. They had to let him go. That's how he beat that. That's how he come out on that motherfucker after 21 years. Got back to the street. Started rocking and rolling. He wasn't on the street that long. Couple of years, if that long. Might have been a year, that's a little over a year. Might have been less than that. He had just come to the street, man. He was rocking and rolling though. You know, the motherfucker that told me, said, "Yeah, you're mad up there. He's still up there on 9th Street. Yeah, man, he back with RJ, man. He driving a Mercedes and da-da-da-da-da. Man, somebody was wind up killing that motherfucker. Showing up. I said, that motherfucker ain't know that he's still out there. Motherfucker told me. I said, man, he's selling dope hand in hand. He ain't had no workers. He's selling that shit. See? Got stuck in town, man. Still thinking he was back in the motherfucking 60s.
Thanks for tuning in to the District Heroin Connection, a.k.a. the Carl Terrible Turk Kelly story. As you can see, man, I changed the name to the channel. It's now DC Raw and Uncut. I think it fit the content more. Also, I know I said that I would do the Linwood Gray story next, but to be honest, man, this was a lot to cover by itself as far as that era go. And people have already made YouTube videos about Gray, so after doing this video, I don't really think it's necessary to go back down that wormhole again. Unless y'all really want me to, man, you just gotta let me know. Otherwise, man, we gonna move on to a whole nother video, whole nother subject. Night Rider 707, aka Jay, checking out with another one, man. Peace to everybody that tapped into this video. Yes, sir.